Hello and welcome. While the SCO summit has been a huge diplomatic win for India, what does it mean economically going forward? Well, to decode this, I'm joined by policy expert Jaijit Bhattacharya and economist Mitali Nikore. Thank you both for your time. First, for our viewers to understand, Prime Minister Narendra Modi has stressed that, and he stressed at the Shanghai Cooperation Organization that look, member states must say in one voice that double standards on terrorism are unacceptable. And shortly after, the regional bloc echoed India's stand in the summit and the declaration. And so this really is a diplomatically really is a massive win for India. But what does this mean economically? With of course trade cooperation with Russia and China also being as one of the talking points and one of the agendas. And going forward, what does it mean about India-China trade relations, given the fact that the trade deficit with China has widened? So, of course, to decode this, Jaijit Bhattacharya, your first thoughts. So, diplomatically, it's been a big win, but economically and for trade relations, what does it mean going forward?
Let's just step back and see why SEO is so important at this point in time, and why did our Prime Minister decide to go to China for this particular SEO summit. Is because there has been a disruption in global trade, to put it very, very bluntly, which everybody is aware of. And therefore, till now, we have been working on, from an economic perspective, the theory of China plus one, where we need to have supply chain resilience, because during COVID, China had cut off a lot of supplies to not just India but to the rest of the world. Even as recently as last month, they were still putting a choke on critical minerals, on rare earth magnets, on things like germanium tetrachloride, which is important for our fiber optic industry, for our telecom industry. So there has been a lot of chokes, and therefore we were looking at, and the rest of the world was looking at a China plus one strategy. And clearly, India was kind of fitting into that China plus one strategy. Now, what we see is that instead of the supply side being an issue, the demand side has suddenly become an issue with the US administration putting in the tariffs. So now we are looking at a US plus one strategy, that let's not put all our baskets from a demand perspective into the US, which is one of the largest markets on this planet, and therefore can we look at alternate markets. When we're looking at alternate markets, there are issues which needs to be resolved. Issues such as terrorism that needs to be acknowledged. You cannot have people whose hands are dripping in terrorist blood, and they are sitting across the table as equals, and that is not acceptable. And therefore, SCO had those problems, which is why it was important that we straighten out that part, which is what happened with our Prime Minister talking about the issue of terrorism that needs to be acknowledged by everybody. If you recollect, in the last SCO, our defense minister refused to sign the joint declaration because it spoke about terrorism in Balochistan, but had no mention of the dastardly act that happened in Pahalgam, where 26 innocent tourists were killed based on their faith and based on whatever else, but pure act of terrorism which was sponsored by a state actor. So it was a state-driven terrorism, and that needs to be straightened out before we can really have any other meaningful conversation. On the point that that the deficit between India and China has gone up, but we also need to keep in mind that the exports from India to China has also significantly gone up, and therefore the big hole that India has seen in terms of exports to US, which is about 40 to 45 billion dollar, depending on how we calculate it. It is important that we find out alternate markets for that $45 billion hole to be fixed up. Some of it could be domestic, which is what our government has done by reducing the GST so that consumption goes up, so that some of the things that were meant for the US market can get consumed in the domestic market. But that will still not be enough. So we need to start working on multiple such initiatives. And the SCO summit is clearly one of those initiatives.
Right, clearly one of those initiatives, Mitali. Do you agree? Also signaling a big strategic shift then, the SCO summit. And look, for those wondering, what does this really mean with, of course, trade cooperation getting mentioned very, very significantly as far as Russia and China are concerned, expanding trade, easing travel restrictions, all of this really being discussed. How do you think this will pan out?
No, so I think Dr. Bhattacharya has laid it out very well. What I'd sort of add on to what he's saying is really around, the fact that India has sort of been pushed into a reactionary mode, and that was something that, for the last few weeks our administration and some senses was grappling with. But I think now, with this SCO summit, we are back in the driving seat when it comes back to economic policy. Because initially it was literally a situation where we were negotiating and the US was sort of saying X and not Y, and Y and not Z. And then yet at the end of the day, the government of India, is in a situation where India ends up with 50% tariffs. Now, that sort of signaled that we need to get back into the driving seat as far as economic policy is concerned. Participating in the SCO, I think, is to be viewed as only one of the actions, which is part of this larger policy of export promotion, of ensuring that we are engaging with newer markets, of opening up new doors for our exporters. Because at the end of the day, when we look at SCO, it's not only about the meeting with China. Of course, the meeting with China becomes critical because the SCO is hosted by China, organized by China. But at the same time, SCO opens up so many other bilateral talks which happened, on the sidelines of the summit and as part of the summit, be it with Armenia, be it with other Central Asian countries, be it with Kazakhstan, be it with Kyrgyzstan, be it with the Eastern Asian economies, and then also seeing this as again a part of a larger push where the Prime Minister also visited Japan literally just 2 or 3 days before attending the SCO. So,
Mhm.
as Dr. Jaijit said, this is very much a push towards export diversification. But I also feel that this conversation needs to go beyond exports and trade and imports or anything. It has to go into the direction of long term investment partnerships and joint ventures. And if we look at the experience, even with the US, the fact that the iPhone exports from India are explicitly exempted from this entire tariff saga shows us the power of foreign investment and the power of capital in that sense of driving a lot of these policy decisions in this new multipolar world. So at the end of the day, if we are engaging with China, or we're engaging with Japan, or we're engaging with Australia, or we're engaging with the UAE, whoever it is, today might be a friendly country, tomorrow might be a country whose interests don't align, but the interests of a joint venture or an investment partnership that is set up for the longer term will continue to be, paramount, even in the face of changing geopolitics. So, therefore, I think that for securing employment, for securing some of these trade relations, securing some of these value chains, it becomes important for Indian businesses to also bring capital on the table and say that we are ready to invest in some of these other countries as well, as long as some investment comes to us and we bring in more and more joint ventures where we are owners of the capital as well.
Right. Jaijit Bhattacharya, do you agree really time for India to reflect that, look, we are in that driving seat. Long-term investments really should be key, as Mitali was mentioning. Do you agree that really was somewhere, also what Prime Minister Modi, has intended to do with, of course, his significant voice at the summit? Sir, I think you've muted yourself.
Right. No, so absolutely, yes, I completely agree with what Mitali said. It's important to have the investments in, but also the other point that Mitali mentioned about what all the US has allowed. It has allowed electronics to come in because that's important for them for whatever reason. They've also allowed barytes to come in because that's critical for their oil and gas industry, and India is the largest supplier of barite. If we stop supplying barytes, the US oil and gas industry will come down to its knees. Pretty similar to the effect that happened when China stopped supply of rare earth magnets. Are we going to do that? That's not what we're suggesting. But the point is that there are multiple leverages besides investments that India has. And if others can use, using the US language, their cards, then we can also use our cards. and there are multiple such cards that exist. It depends on how open are we to use these cards, and also the fact is that we are not here for our ego. Our politicians are not in Shanghai or wherever else because of ego. They're here to solve a problem. They're here to ensure that our businesses are protected, our jobs for our people is protected, and therefore, can we find an alternate to the US market? As I said, it's not just US plus one, but US plus many. If you look at the larger picture, the combined economy of the member countries of SCO is still smaller than the size of the US economy. So that's the kind of difference we're talking about. Even though it represents 42% of the global population, it's still not there in terms of being an alternate to the US economy. Also, the US weakening down is not something that's in India's interest. What's in India's interest will also keep changing. As I've mentioned in other channels, that just like in domestic politics, there are no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. Similarly, in geopolitics, there is no permanent friends and no permanent enemies. It's our national interest which is important, and even that keeps changing. What's of national interest today will change tomorrow, and we need to have the ability and the autonomy to ensure that the will of our government is enforced, and that what's good for our country is taken forward in an amicable manner. Till now, we have been talking about platforms and organizations which are rule based, and we have been participating in it with great vigor, have been in the United Nations with great vigor. But you look at the kind of structure we have in UN. The largest country in the world is not even in the permanent member of the United Nations. The fourth largest economy in the world is not a permanent member of the United Nations. So obviously these are rule-based order, but the rules are not ours. And therefore, as the SCO starts getting crafted, it's still not a mature organization. It's still, I would say, in its teenage kind of a place. We need to ensure that the rules are aligned for what is in our interest. Now, if you look at the member countries, they are largely member countries which are neighboring China or member countries which are encircling India. Those are two different terms. They perhaps represent the same thing, but they've got different implications. And therefore, you see the SCO clearly has been crafted in China's interest, and that's what any nation will do. If they have taken up an initiative, they will craft that platform as per their interest. Therefore, it's important for India to make sure that that platform also supports India's interests. Till the time it does, India will be part of it. The day this platform stops supporting India's interests, India will not be out of will not be part of this platform. And Rajnath Singh's walking away, not signing that agreement, or Ajit Doval's walking away because a wrong map was shown. I think those show what is the strategic intent that India has. We will be part of this as long as it serves an interest. The day it stops serving our interest, we will not be part of this scene.
Absolutely, Mitali. Do you agree? National interest priority now takes center stage, and is this really then somewhere an opportunity to just rethink and refresh economic engagement with all? You were mentioning Japan, of course, China and Russia. We've seen trade cooperation. I see a significant mention there. So your thoughts really on how this could also mean a complete refresh and rethink really on economic engagement, but like Jaijit Bhattacharya said, no permanent friends or enemies in geopolitics then.
So I think that there's a school of thought that if women ran the world, it would run very differently. And I think women always think about relationships a little bit more. I know I might be termed as controversial for saying this, but as a feminist economist, when I interpret a lot of these things, I do think that any country, there are certain universal truths that any country always has to think about. The first is, how is my growth and development going to reach the most marginalized sections of my society? Because at the end of the day, if it's the women and it's the children and it's the nutrition and it's the health and education of my population that I'm concerned about, I need growth for that, but I also need redistributive mechanisms. And I think India, being a country which has always been, I mean, a welfare state over and above anything else, it is very critical for us, of course, for our growth to continue, but also for us to have those very, capable redistributive mechanisms. Now, for many years, India has relied and, in fact, tried to strengthen from internally the UN system and the UN organizations, which which have helped in many cases and many years to strengthen these goals, especially the Sustainable Development Goals. But today, India finds itself in a spot. I'm not even speaking as an Indian, but just as an international observer. If you just look at it from Mars' point of view, India finds itself in a situation where, we've been working to strengthen these institutions, and yet we're not getting our say and our due, despite the fact that so many Indians contribute talent to international organizations. So many Indians contribute in terms of financing to the international organizations. Now, as Jaijit sir said, SCO is one organization. China has, I mean, we should look into this point as well, that China has been investing for so many years to strengthen an organization like the SCO. Today, it is a teenager, but it has taken successive years of institution building to get the SCO to the place where it is. And in many cases, that also suggests to India that, is it time for India to step up when it comes to multilateralism? Not only through these established means like the UN or the SCO or other groupings, but to say that we should probably start strengthening, say, a BIMSTEC or even a SARC or other groupings where India can centralize its own interests with not only again its neighbors but with the ASEAN region, with the Asian, wider Asian peninsula. Because, and I think the Prime Minister is thinking in that direction, because in Japan he really did speak about the Asian century of growth and sustainability. And the opportunity is there for for India to also now play a bigger role at a multilateral stage. So I think till now we've been a developing country, we've been a country dealing with a lot of our own growth and redistribution issues. But today, as the world's fourth largest economy, I would apply the same logic that every woman applies to these situations, that if they don't give you a chair, then you bring your own stool. And if they don't let you in on the table, then you create your own room of discussion. Because that's how feminist economists have, made a space for themselves anyway. So
Well, couldn't think of a better note to end this on. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your thoughts. And like you were saying, Mitali, this really is the moment to seize this opportunity. The SCO summit signaling a big strategic shift, but really time for India, and India is all set to play the bigger role really now. Thank you so much, both of you, for sharing your thoughts.
Thank you.
thank you.